Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. I was reading this article the other day, and it really kind of hit me. 1 in 3 small and medium businesses got hit by a cyber attack last year. And it just got me thinking, with everything that's going on in the world, in the cybersecurity world, how can we stay ahead of the curve? That's exactly what we're doing today, a deep dive into cybersecurity. We've got news articles, reports from some leading security firms, even firsthand accounts from people who've been right on the front lines of these digital battles.
And it's really fascinating. Just the variety of attacks and who they're targeting. It's not just like tech giants and governments anymore. We're seeing attacks on everything from small hospitals to court systems. Even individuals are getting caught in the crosshairs. It really highlights how interconnected our digital world is and the ripple effects these attacks can have.
Right. Like that huge data breach at ORBCOMM, that satellite data company. They lost 70 terabytes of data. Think about that. 70 terabytes. That's not just numbers and code. It's sensitive customer data, financial records, proprietary information, all the stuff that keeps a company running. It's no wonder that this hacker, going by Krypton Zambi, is demanding a king's ransom.
Yeah, it's a classic ransomware playbook. But what's interesting is, even with these large-scale attacks, hackers are getting a lot more strategic. Like the Schneider Electric breach, for example, the attackers specifically targeted their sustainability business division. They even offered a 50% discount on the ransom to the new CEO. So they're clearly doing their homework. They're exploiting these pressure points and leadership transitions to try to maximize their chances of getting paid.
Wow, so it's almost like they're running a business, but a very shady one. But what really hit home for me was the attack on Memorial Hospital and Manor in Georgia. Can you imagine? A hospital being held hostage by ransomware. They were forced to revert to paper charts. I mean, talk about a logistical nightmare.
It is. It's a stark reminder that these attacks have real-world consequences, impacting our lives in tangible ways. And it's not just hospitals. The Washington State court system, they also experienced a major outage recently, they're calling it. Unauthorized activity. It's not confirmed if it's a cyber attack bug. Courts statewide were affected, delaying hearings, disrupting access to justice. It makes you think, how vulnerable are the systems that we rely on every day?
Yeah. It's a serious wake-up call. These cyber criminals are getting bolder and more sophisticated in their tactics. But how are they targeting us on an individual level?
Well, one way is through phishing scams. And these are getting harder and harder to spot. The FBI actually issued an alert recently about cyber criminals impersonating government officials to steal sensitive information. They're spoofing phone numbers, using fake credentials, and then using high-pressure tactics to try to trick people into handing over personal data.
So it's not even just enough to be wary of suspicious emails anymore. We have to be on guard for phone calls too.
Exactly. And what's even more concerning is they're playing on our psychology. They create a sense of urgency or even use intimidation to make people panic and act impulsively. They know we're inclined to trust authority figures and that we want to quickly resolve problems, so they exploit that.
Right. It's like a digital con game, and they're not stopping at phone calls. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
Click Fix campaign. It's like phishing 2.0.
Yeah, it's a prime example of social engineering at its finest. They're sending emails that are designed to look like legitimate error messages from your bank, internet provider, even software companies. You click the link to fix the problem, but instead, you're downloading malware that gives them access to your device.
Or they're preying on our desire to fix things and get back to normal.
That's sneaky. I could definitely see how people would fall for that. It's almost like a digital Trojan horse.
Yep.
Exactly. Both the impersonation scams and this Click Fix campaign, they exploit our trust, our desire for quick solutions. It makes you realize we all need to be a lot more cautious about what we click on and who we trust online. But it's not just about our personal data. There's a whole other layer to this with software vulnerabilities.
Right. Those flaws in the code that hackers can exploit. Speaking of flaws, Google just patched 2 zero-day vulnerabilities in Android. What's interesting is one of them involves a use after free flaw in Qualcomm's digital signal processor. I mean, what does that even mean?
Well, think of it like trying to access a file on your computer that's already been deleted. It can cause the system to crash. Or even worse, give the hackers a way to sneak in, essentially. These flaws allow attackers to escalate privileges on your device.
So they're gaining more control than they should have, like giving someone a guest key and they end up having full access to your house, secure stuff. And Google wasn't the only one. IBM had their own set of issues with security verify access.
Yeah, 36 to be exact. Imagine that, 36 vulnerabilities, some even allowing remote code execution and authentication bypass, which are basically like digital keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, that sounds like a security nightmare. So an attacker could potentially hijack accounts, even lock out legitimate admins. That's insane.
It is. And what's worrying is that these vulnerabilities
Hmm.
haven't been patched yet, which means anyone using IBM Security Verify access is potentially at risk. And it's not just individual users or companies either. Industrial systems are vulnerable too.
Right, like those issues with Rockwell Thin Manager, the software used in industrial control systems.
Yes, these vulnerabilities could allow attackers to
Yeah.
shut down critical systems like power grids or even manipulate data in factories, potentially causing chaos and even safety hazards.
Wow, so these vulnerabilities are a really big deal, affecting everything from our phones to critical infrastructure. This is a lot to take in. I'm curious, what's CS's take on all this? Are they doing anything to help mitigate these risks?
Absolutely. They've been urging companies to prioritize patching these vulnerabilities
Yeah.
and to isolate their control systems to minimize the damage if an attack does occur.
Okay, so it sounds like while there are serious threats out there, there are also steps being taken to address them. But what about us, the average users? We don't have teams of security experts at our disposal. What can we do to protect ourselves?
That's a great question, and that's what we'll be digging into next. The good news is there are a lot of simple yet effective things you can do to boost your digital security, and they don't require a degree in computer science.
So we've been talking about all these high-profile attacks and vulnerabilities. It's enough to make anyone paranoid, but let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what we can actually do about it. What are some practical steps that we can take to protect ourselves in this wild west of cyberspace?
Well, the first step is awareness. You need to know what you're up against. Think of it like this. You wouldn't walk down a dark alley at night without being aware of your surroundings, right?
Yeah.
Same goes for the digital world. You need to be aware of the potential threats and how to avoid them.
So it's about being street smart,
Yeah,
but in the digital sense.
exactly. And one of the biggest things you can do is just be super careful about what you click on. You know those phishing emails
Yeah.
and fake error messages that we talked about? They're getting more and more sophisticated.
Right. Like that ClickFix campaign. It sounds so easy to fall for.
It really is. So always double check the sender's email address. Look for any typos, grammatical errors. Hover over links before you click them to see where they actually lead. And if something seems off, it probably is. Don't be afraid to be skeptical if you get an email or phone call that seems suspicious, even if it looks like it's from a legitimate source. Take a moment to verify it.
So trust your gut.
Exactly. And when it comes to passwords, strong and unique is the name of the game. Don't use the same password for multiple accounts. Make sure they're a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers and symbols.
Okay, that makes sense. But who can remember all those crazy passwords?
That's where a password manager comes in handy. It's like a digital vault. For all your passwords, you only need to remember one master password to unlock the vault.
Ah, that's clever. And what about software updates? Are those really that important?
Absolutely crucial. Those updates often contain security patches that fix vulnerabilities. It's like locking the doors and windows of your digital house.
Oh.
And make sure you're updating all your devices, not just your computer, your phone, tablet, smart home devices. They all need to be up to date.
So basically, stay vigilant and keep everything patched up. Now, what about backing up our data? I've heard that that's important, but honestly, I haven't gotten around to it.
Well, think of it as an insurance policy for your digital life. If you get hit with ransomware or you experience a hardware failure, you won't lose all your precious photos, documents, and other important files. There are lots of cloud-based backup services that make it super easy. Or you can use an external hard drive. The key is to just do it regularly.
Okay, I'm adding that to my to-do list for sure. Now, we've talked a lot about what individuals can do, but what about businesses? Especially small and medium-sized businesses, they might not have the resources for a dedicated cybersecurity team. What are some key things they can do to protect themselves?
You're absolutely right. SMBs are often prime targets because weaker security measures in place. A good starting point is to create a cybersecurity culture within the company. This means educating employees about the risks, implementing strong password policies, and having a plan in place in case of an attack.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about having the right mindset and procedures in place.
Precisely. Even small steps can make a big difference. Multi-factor authentication is another essential tool. This adds an extra layer of security, but requiring users to provide more than just a password to access accounts.
Right, like getting a text message with a code you need to enter. It's a bit of a hassle sometimes, but I guess it's worth it for the added security.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the importance of regular security assessments
Yeah.
and penetration testing. This can help identify weaknesses in your systems before attackers can exploit them. Think of it as like a regular checkup for your digital health.
Makes sense. And what about this trend of AI learning mechanisms and code base leaks? Seems like that could be a real game changer in the cybersecurity landscape.
It definitely has the potential to be a double-edged sword. AI can be a powerful tool for both defense and offense. It can help analyze massive amounts of data to detect threats more quickly, but it can also be used by attackers to find and exploit vulnerabilities at an unprecedented pace.
So it's like giving both sides a superpowered weapon. That's a bit unnerving.
It is, and it's why it's crucial that we develop and deploy AI responsibly with safeguards in place to prevent misuse. The cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving, and we need to stay informed and adapt to stay ahead of the curve.
Well said. So it sounds like there's a lot we can do, both as individuals and businesses, to stay safe in the digital world. But with all these threats and vulnerabilities, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and helpless. What's a key takeaway here? What do you want our listeners to remember? I feel like we've really covered a lot of ground today, from those massive data breaches to those really sneaky phishing scams and those scary software vulnerabilities. It's almost enough to make you want to unplug from the internet altogether.
I understand the feeling, but the reality is we live in a digital world, and unplugging isn't really an option for most of us.
Right.
The key takeaway here, I think, is that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. We all have a role to play in protecting ourselves and our digital lives.
So it's not about living in fear. It's about being empowered to take action.
Exactly. It's about understanding the risks, taking steps to mitigate them. Think of it like wearing a seatbelt in a car. You don't expect to get in an accident, but you wear it just in case. It's the same with cybersecurity. You don't have to be a tech expert. You just need to adopt some basic safety habits.
Right, like being aware of phishing scams, using strong passwords, and keeping your software updated. Those simple things can really make a difference.
Absolutely. And if you remember nothing else from our deep dive today, remember this. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. There are tons of resources available online, from government agencies like the CISO, the FBI, and CISA, to cybersecurity companies and consumer advocacy groups.
So we're not alone in this fight. There's a whole community of people and organizations out there dedicated to making the digital world a safer place.
Exactly. And that's important to remember because as our world becomes increasingly reliant on technology and interconnected systems, the line between the digital and physical realms is blurring.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. Cyber attacks, they aren't just about stealing data anymore. They can disrupt critical infrastructure, impact our access to healthcare, even interfere with elections. The consequences of these attacks are no longer confined to the digital world. They can have real-world impact on our safety, our finances, and even our democracy.
That's a sobering thought. It really highlights how important cybersecurity is, not just for individuals and businesses, but for society as a whole.
Exactly. Cybersecurity is no longer just a technical issue. It's a societal issue, and it's one that we need to address collectively.
Well said. This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's a reminder that we all need to step up our game when it comes to cybersecurity. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, actually feel more empowered to take action. Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. And remember, it's an ongoing process. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, so we need to stay informed and adapt our security practices accordingly.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for me to go change all my passwords and make sure my software is up to date. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cybersecurity. Stay safe out there in the digital Wild West, everyone.